All right. Well, welcome to Science on the Sound for 2025. If you're new to the Mass Center's Science on the Sound series, we have experts in the field who will give a talk. This week, we have Emily Bjornsgaard, who is the lead aquarist here at the Mass Center Aquarium. If you visited us or done a field trip, you've probably seen her. You probably met her in person. Well, she is an enthusiast about lumpsuckers, and I can't blame her because lumpsuckers are a super cool fish that you can see here at the Mass Center Aquarium or in the wild out here at Redondo Beach in Des Moines. And so today she's going to take us through all of the cool stuff that she has learned over the last couple of years of these amazing, cool little critters. And if you have any questions as she's talking, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. I'll be monitoring it as she goes along. And then at the end of her talk, we'll have some Q&A time. So please feel free to drop them in the chat box, but we'll get to your questions towards the end. But no further ado, we'll have Emily take it away.
All right. Thank you, Ariel. Let me share my presentation here. All right, so welcome everyone. Today we will be talking about the secret lives of lumpsuckers. My name is Emily Bjornsgaard. I am the lead aquarist at the Mass Center Aquarium. I've been at the Mass Center since 2023, so about a year and a half now. I graduated from Western Washington University with a Bachelor's of Science in Biology with a marine emphasis, and then I did a year of education in the aquarium science program down in Newport at Oregon Coast Community College. You can also find me on social media where I take pictures of our local marine life on our beaches and at different aquariums at eMarineLife on Facebook and Instagram. I have worked in aquariums since 2019, but I have been obsessed with the ocean since I was very, very little. These two pictures here I just love because the top one is me at the Oregon Coast Aquarium in Newport. I was probably 4, and then the other photo is the same shark jaws last summer. So about 20 something years apart between these photos. But I have been obsessed with the ocean since I was very little. And several years ago, I first learned about the lumpsuckers. But first, what in the world is a lumpsucker? You might hear that name and think, I have no idea what that is. I don't really know where to start. However, it is a group of fish. So the family Cyclopteridae is a group of fish. There's about 30 different species in it. And all of them live in cold water. They're all northern hemisphere, so in the Atlantic, Arctic, and Pacific Oceans. And of those 30 species, most of them live in the eastern or in the western Pacific, so around Japan and Russia, up into the Arctic. And then we only have one species that lives here in Washington. There are several species that have made the news for different reasons. So not just our local Pacific spiny lumpsucker, but there are some other ones that are really impressive in different ways. So one of those is the smooth lumpsucker. They may not be the most attractive of these fish, but smooth lumpsuckers, or Aptocyclus ventricosus, is a species that lives up in Alaska in the North Pacific and some of the associated seas in that area. They are pretty large. They get up to 16 inches. And the really interesting thing about these fish, that even though they have a suction cup on their stomachs, just like all the rest of the fish in this group, they are actually a pelagic species. So they don't spend a lot of time associated with the bottom of the ocean. They spend their time in the water column eating jellies and ctenophores, which are comb jellies, and a variety of different types of zooplankton. They can be found near shore in the springtime when they come shallow to breed. So if you're up in Alaska, you may see them on the beaches if they're spawning. But other than that, they spend their time in the deep out in the North Pacific Ocean. The Atlantic lumpfish is one that actually went viral on social media a couple of years ago. They are also quite large and can get up to 24 inches long. They're one of the larger ones that I've seen stats on. And they are in the North Atlantic, so they're one of the Atlantic species, and can be found in the Baltic Sea, Arctic Ocean, very far north. They like the really cold water. They can live 7 to 13 years, so they're relatively long-lived. And they eat a variety of things, but the reason that they are well known and well studied is because they are used in salmon farms and are actually grown and aquacultured for controlling parasites in salmon farms. So as you can see in this photo here, the lumpsuckers live with the salmon in the salmon pens and will eat the small crustacean parasites that live on the salmon and keep the salmon healthy for that job industry. There has been some studies recently into the increasing the welfare for these fish because they are doing a very important job keeping the salmon healthy, and so we want to do a good job to keep the fish healthy. But looking at the Pacific spiny lumpsucker, which is the one we'll be focusing on today, they are a small fish. They only get a couple inches long, but their name is a really good place to start when you're trying to describe them. They are in the genus or the group Eumicrotremus, which comes from Greek, which means truly little hole or good little hole. And it is referring to where this red arrow is here. They're very tiny gill opening. So this is where the water is moved over their gills and then all goes out that little hole. And so that's how they get their name. In this group, there are actually 18 different species and they all look fairly similar to this one. But there are 18 species, one of which lives in the Atlantic. One of them lives here in the Eastern Pacific, and all the other 17 species live in the Western Pacific. So they live over in Japan and Russia and that side of the Pacific Ocean. So we have the Pacific spiny lumpsucker spans the entire North Pacific, and we are about as far south as they come in their range. But their common name, not only does their scientific name describe something about them, but their common name, Pacific spiny lumpsucker, is a good way to remember them because they live in the Pacific. They are covered in these spines. They are a little lump and they have a suction disc. So Pacific spiny lumpsucker is a good way to remember them. And a little bit more about them, they can be found intertidally. So sometimes during certain parts of the year, they can be found as shallow as a couple inches of seawater. And then they can also be found several hundred feet deep. So they really span the nearshore and coastal environments. They are found in the North Pacific, and I have a map of kind of their distribution, but they're found pretty much all over the North Pacific Ocean. They do only reach an inch or two in length, so they're quite a bit smaller than something like the smooth lumpsucker or the Atlantic lumpfish. There have been reportings of a 5-inch Pacific spiny lumpsucker, but the largest one I've personally seen was about 2.5 inches. So they stay relatively small. They do eat crustaceans, worms, mollusks, anything that's small and in the sand. They're pretty active hunters, so they will pick at things that move. And for reproduction, the females lay eggs that are guarded by the male. And these are just a few of the photos of some that I've worked with over the last couple years. They're very charismatic. Their eyes move independently, so they have very expressive faces for a fish. So here's a map that I got data points from a website called FishBase. It's a really good tool to find distributions of different species. And so this was some data points that were in FishBase that I applied to Google Maps, and it can show you exactly where Pacific spiny lumpsuckers have been found. The blue points are specific data points that were reported to FishBase. The red are ones that I added, and all of these C's that are listed on the slide are these red data points. And they're more general areas, they're not specific. And then that little tiny purple point down here in Washington is Lumpy Land, which is local here to Redondo Beach. So when we look a little bit closer at our local area here in the Salish Sea and in Washington, lumpsuckers can be found all year long. They don't vacate the sound for the entire summer, but they are typically seen during the winter. As they prefer really cold water, they don't tend to stay shallow when our shallow waters hit 60 degrees. They tend to be in the area when the water is closer to 50, 51 degrees and colder. So they can be seen by tide poolers and beach shore explorers during the winter low tides, which are typically 10, 11, 12 p.m. And they are most commonly seen by winter divers. So if you need a reason to be out in the water and brave that cold, the Pacific spiny lumpsucker is one of those animals that you're really only going to see during the cold times in the Puget Sound. They do come relatively shallow though for scuba divers. Down to about 30 feet is where they're commonly seen. And Redondo Beach, which is where the Mass Center is located, is one of the more common places to see them. They are typically found on barrier areas, so where the eelgrass meets rocky habitat, they'll be right along in that area, and typically south of the boat ramp. So if you're at Redondo Beach and you see the boat ramp, you want to go south to find the lumpsuckers. As you move into the spring and the water's warming up, you'll stop seeing the larger of the lumpsuckers and you'll start to see the young of year, so the little tiny babies on kelps that are growing pretty quickly in the spring. So here, this is a video that my dive buddy took a couple years ago from Lumpy Land at Redondo Beach. And as we play this, you're gonna see probably the highlight of my diving ever. This little lumpsucker detached from the ground was swimming up. You can see there is a little bit of a current, and so it's making use of its suction disc and decided to stick to my finger, which, as you can tell, I was quite excited about. I was a little nervous in this video that it was just going to get blown away, so that's why my hand was kind of guiding it as it swam along. But of course, it is made for these conditions and just kind of went along as the current pushed it. So Pacific spiny lumpsuckers are commonly found in aquariums, particularly ones where they are a local species. So the Seattle Aquarium, Point Defiance, a lot of our smaller facilities have Pacific spiny lumpsuckers on display. In aquariums, they typically only live a couple years. They are a pretty short-lived species, and it depends on how big they were and when they were collected or when you got them, and then how cold the water is that they live in, because they really like it cold. In every aquarium that I've either worked in or talked to, 50 degrees Fahrenheit is about as warm as you want it to get, maybe 51 or 52, but any warmer than that and it can be more difficult for the fish. They can be a little bit more stressed, so we want to keep it as cold as possible. And then for salinity and pH, we want marine ocean conditions, so we want salty water and slightly basic pH. So we want it to be a little bit higher in that range. They are prone to ciliate parasites, which are a microscopic parasite, which I've got some pictures of in a couple later slides. So doing active medical treatments on them is really important to keep them healthy. And they are active eaters. So in the wild, they're active eaters. In aquariums, they are also active. They will eat adult brine shrimp, also known as sea monkeys, mysis shrimps, chopped up squid, pretty much any kind of small meaty food they are all about. And so at the Mass Center, we've housed them in a couple different exhibits. On the left is our lumpsucker exhibit last year, after our male had been removed from the tank to guard his eggs behind the scenes. So the males are the ones that are the nesters, and so they prefer barnacle cones, as you can see in this middle photo. This lumpsucker took up residence in the barnacle cone, so when we moved him off exhibit, we didn't need any more barnacles in that tank. So we had some eelgrass, some rocky structures, some circular rocks they really like to sit on. And that's kind of the exhibit we had for them. This year, we actually have a few more lumpsuckers than we had last year, so we moved them to one of our larger small exhibits. And because we have more males than we did last year, our ratio is more 50-50 rather than more females than males. We have several different barnacle structures for them to choose from, and then we added some other invertebrates to brighten up the tank, add some movement. At the Mass Center, we collect our lumpsuckers at night during late night low tide beach seines, which is when they come shallow enough for us to actually get to them without having to dive for them. And a little bit about their anatomy. Even though they're kind of a funky looking fish, they have a pretty straightforward structure: eyes, mouth at the front, dorsal fins on top. But there are some of these structures that are really important to tell which one is a male and a female. And then, of course, they have their suction disc that holds them to any solid surface. One really interesting thing about the lumpsuckers is they actually don't have scales. They have something called a tubercle, which is coated in enamel like our teeth, and it's kind of like body armor for them. And so you can see here at the bottom of the slide a zoomed in photo of a juvenile's developing tubercle there. And comparing males versus females, people always ask me, like, how can you tell? How do you know which one's a male and a female? And my typical kind of half-joking answer is their vibes. But there are a few different ways that you can actually tell which is a male and a female. Females are more oblong, so they're more oval shaped. So this is a female here on the left. And then on the right is our male, where they're a little bit more circular and taller rather than longer. The tubercles on the female reach further back, and so you can see that's this patch here on the diagram, whereas the males tend to stop just past halfway. And then the dorsal fin here on the top is smaller and held a little bit backwards on the female, whereas the males are quite prominent and larger and held up kind of like a flag. So you can also sometimes tell based on behavior. So if you have some of those body characteristics, if they're hard to tell, you can tell based on behavior. So females are not necessarily pelagic where they are in the water column, but they are constantly wandering. And so unless they're actively laying eggs in a nest of a male, they are swimming around. They don't nest in barnacles. So they're just kind of go with the flow, whereas the males are seasonally pelagic. They will explore and swim around in non-breeding times, but then once breeding season hits, they are the nesters, and they will find a barnacle and make it into a nest so that they can guard eggs. And I mentioned that they have a suction disc. They have a very interesting suction disc structure. So we have three types of fish here in the sound that have a suction disc of some kind. Snailfish and lumpsuckers are very closely related. That would be this one here and this one here on the corner. Top right corner, those two are the snailfish and the lumpsucker. They're very closely related and they have very similar suction cups. Northern clingfish, which is the third photo at the top, also have a suction cup, but they are actually pretty distantly related to a lumpsucker, so their suction cup is a little bit different. And there was a study in 2022 on the comparative stickiness of these suction cups, and it was hypothesized that the strength of the suction cup has to do with the ability to stay in place in their different environments. So clingfish live in high wave action areas where there's a lot of bumping around, and so they need a stronger suction disc, whereas the lumpsuckers and the snailfish live in calmer, more sheltered areas typically, and so their suction disc can be a little bit less strong. And as you can see there, they will stick to anything, including fingers. And then the baby lumpsuckers that we grew here at the Mass Center actually like to stick to plastic eggs. So you'll see some photos of them upside down on the sides of these plastic Easter eggs. And they are able to change color, which is really interesting. Most of our local fish have some ability to shift their color, either lighter or darker, just to blend in with their environment. However, this one was a pretty dramatic color shift that we saw last spring. So this is our male lumpsucker, Rusty, who we had last winter, and we named him Rusty, obviously, due to his brownish orangish coloration. And so we were like, okay, this is great. We can tell that this is male. He was the only male that we had, so we could really track his development over time. And after guarding eggs for about a month and a half and being moved back on exhibit, he actually turned a bright pink. It was undetermined when his color shifted so dramatically, but these two photos were taken almost exactly a month apart with the same lighting. So they were normal ambient lighting plus a dive light. So it's not lighting, it's not color effects that have shown this difference. But yeah, really, really dramatic color shift in one fish. So it's super interesting. This is kind of a whole overview of their reproduction. We saw some of this at the Mass Center this last year. Males and females will be in the same area, so they all come shallow to the nearshore environments to lay eggs. The males will pick out a barnacle or a crevice to nest in, and then the female comes by and lays her eggs in the nest. And then she goes back on her way to go lay eggs in a couple months. The male is a very dedicated parent and guards the eggs until they hatch, which for us took about, I want to say about 5 or 6 weeks. And then those little babies will swim off and develop over about a year until they are ready to reproduce again. We haven't seen the entire cycle, but we did get from March to December with our little lumpsuckers, and then we have collected some more this winter. So we're hopeful that we'll see some more babies this spring. So starting last March, we did have a dedicated lumpsucker rearing project at the Mass Center, which we have put together and that we'll talk about now. So eggs were laid in March 8th, and then over the following week, all 4 of our females laid eggs. We watched the embryo development from mid-March to mid-April when the eggs hatched. And then in October through December, we were actually able to share some of our baby lumpsuckers with some other local aquariums. So in total, we were able to send 85 fish to 8 different facilities in Washington and Oregon. And we kept a few at the Mass Center, which was great. But it's really great to be able to do a project like this so that we are not necessarily collecting all these fish in the wild, that we can share the love of lumpsuckers. In total, we did have a survival rate of almost 23%. While it seems low, you want to keep in mind that every adult lumpsucker needs at least 1 offspring to keep the population stable. So if you have a pair of lumpsuckers, 1 male, 1 female, of that pairing, you want 2 offspring to survive, and we had 89. So for the first time rearing these fish, we were really excited about our results. And it turns out lumpsuckers lay a lot of eggs. This was from a necropsy that we did later on in the summer last year when one of our females unfortunately passed. And she passed with over 400 eggs inside of her body. There are 420 eggs in this photo that I counted, and we think potentially that she was on her way to being egg-bound, which can happen in birds and in fish. So what happens is when they don't lay their eggs, the eggs get all stuck inside of them. These eggs weren't quite ready to be laid, so we don't know if that's exactly what happened with her, but it was really interesting to get a count of how many eggs she had produced. More eggs means a better chance of successful offspring, and as you'll see, these fish hatch out very small, so the more eggs that they're able to produce increases the chance that the population will continue. And lumpsucker males are incredibly good parents, as it turns out. This is, again, Rusty, our resident male lumpsucker last year. He selected the smallest barnacle that he could fit in so that he was able to guard it quite well. You can see there how by turning sideways, you really can't see much into the barnacle. At this time, we had 4 females and 1 male, so we had a 4-to-1 ratio, and all 4 females actually ended up laying eggs within the same week. However, he only guarded and actively watched over 1 clutch. He did fertilize the other one, so we were able to see a little bit of development, but those eggs unfortunately did not develop past a couple days. But with that couple days, we were able to see some of the early stages of embryology, or studying the embryo development of these fish. And then at March 21st, one of the eggs that Rusty had been guarding got kicked out or bumped out of the nest. So we were able to observe that development as well. So there on the left, you can actually see the second cell division. So there are four cells total in that embryo of a fish that would eventually become a fish, which is super interesting to see that early in the stage. And then the March 14th photo is a blastocyst or in between cell division and segmentation, or the developing different parts of the fish. And then the March 21st photo, you can clearly see the beginnings of a nervous system. You can see the eyes start to develop. And then on the kind of the bottom left of that photo, you can see the tail start to curve around the yolk. And then from March 25th to April 12th, we watched the development of that single egg that had been kicked out of the nest. You can see by April 6th it started to have some diatom and other microorganism growth on it. So we did try to remove some of that without damaging the eggshell at all to prevent a premature hatching. And then on April 14th, a second egg was accidentally bumped out of the nest. This is when there was active hatching going on, so it likely just got jostled out. Both the April 6th and the April 14th eggs hatched normally, so the little babies did make it out just fine. But it also shows the difference that the lumpsucker parental care can make. Obviously, as staff, we tried to keep the egg as healthy and as clean as possible, but that is nothing compared to the male lumpsucker's ability to keep the eggs and get them ready for hatching. And then you can see there the April 18th photo was just the day after the last hatches happened. And that little fish is on an airline that is approximately a 1/4 inch wide. And so you can see just how small that the fish start out. And speaking of hatches, we had a lot of hatches. In total, we had 387 fish hatch over 4 days. And so the reports that we had seen of lumpsuckers hatching before in other aquariums were in the realm of 60 to 200. So we had almost double that, which was a surprise for sure, but it was a welcome surprise. And in this next video, you can see how they swim. So they try their best. When a lumpsucker hatches out, it is mostly a head and a tail. So we see in that photo on the left, the 14th of, or 14 days post-hatch, DPH is days post-hatch. That fish is starting to develop, but still pretty much what they look like when they hatch out. Very small head, very long tail. They do hatch out with all of their fins intact and in place. However, they do still have some growth to do with those fins. They also hatch out with their suction cup fully formed. So they are able to stick to things right away, which is super interesting. And so you can see over the photos here, in the moment, it didn't seem necessarily like they were developing a whole lot, but looking back on the photos, obviously you can see quite a bit of growth and eye development, dorsal fin development, and then their tail region starts to fill out with muscles and structures that are needed as an adult doesn't develop in the egg. And by December, they were all similarly proportioned to an adult, even if they weren't necessarily big as an adult. We also started to see varying speeds in their growth. So about late May, early June, you could see that some of them were growing a lot faster than the others. These two photos in the middle, unfortunately, were mortalities. These were two that died on the same day, where the left one hadn't developed hardly at all, and so it was likely a failure to thrive problem. And then the one on the right actually had developed pretty much fully to that point. And so we don't know why that one passed, but seeing the difference in their development was really kind of interesting. And even as they continue to grow, so on the right-hand side, those are two healthy active juvenile fish. One is slightly larger than the other. We did start to see some color shifts. So as we talked about, the male lumpsucker is able to change color quite a bit. Females can also do that to an extent. And as they grew up, that was no different. They all hatched out a standard dark purple. However, starting in June, we started to see the mottled coloration start to come into play, which is likely to help them blend into their environment as they get larger. In that August photo, you can see 3 different shades of fish in one. And then by October, they were showing more of the adult colorations, the mottled patterning with more light than dark. And then they would range from really light, kind of yellowish green to an almost like dark brown. And what was really helpful about the lumpsuckers is we were able to see when they had eaten. And so without looking at them actively eating, we could see here in May, when they still had quite a bit of their tail undeveloped. You can see this is an empty, a hungry lumpsucker. This is one that had eaten its fill of food. These were taken about 24 hours apart, so after a feeding session. Same thing in December, even though the fish is larger, you can see that this fish is clearly eating and quite healthy. And so our lumpsuckers were typically fed brine shrimp. We did feed a couple other things as they got larger. However, live brine shrimp seems to be the easiest and best way to keep them healthy. However, brine shrimp are kind of like French fries in that they don't have a lot of nutrition just by themselves. So we added some fatty acids and some algae supplements to the brine shrimp to make them a little bit more healthy so that the fish were getting all the nutrients that they needed. And in this video, you'll be able to see that the lumpsuckers' aim isn't super great, but they are very cute when they are eating. Missed the first one. And it also is a lot of effort. And got the second one. And so unfortunately, we did have some setbacks during this project, as many projects do. We had a mortality event in July that we don't know the initial trigger of, but was associated with what are called scutocociliates. Ciliates are microscopic organisms that don't necessarily cause the death of the animal, but can quickly overtake a stressed or dying animal. And so in that left photo, you can see all of these little brown purplish dots are the ciliates in the gill cavity of this fish. And then this video here in the middle will show the movement of the ciliates kind of feeding on another source. This wasn't in the fish. And so in response to this, we did try to use the CChem treatment Metroplex, which is used for a variety of different diseases. But we had some success with controlling the ciliates in this case. And so there's the ciliates moving and feeding. And so after that event, we wanted to make sure that our remaining fish were healthy. And so we did the Metroplex treatment and then actually did a necropsy of one of the larval fish that had died after that, but we didn't see any ciliates on the outside. So we actually opened it up on a dissecting scope. This little fish at the time was probably about 12 millimeters in length, or just over a centimeter. So very small, definitely the smallest necropsy I've ever done. And a necropsy is an autopsy for fish. And so by doing this, I was able to remove the suction cup and look inside at their internal organs to see if there were any visible ciliates there. And fortunately, there were no ciliates. So we did know that there weren't ciliates inhabiting the inside tissues of the fish, at least after the Metroplex treatment, which was promising for us. You can see the liver, which was bright orange. Likely because all of their fatty acids were coming from the brine shrimp and the enrichments we gave to the brine shrimp. You can see that the stomach was empty. That's this big white kind of clear patch here, but you can see that it had been eating because all of this orange in the intestines are the brine shrimp. So this fish, while it had passed and we didn't really know why, it was great to see that there was nothing ciliate based or parasite based inside the fish. And then I didn't get a lot of photos from this because I had many things going on at once, but we did successfully sedate our larval lumpsuckers. So any kind of medical treatment on fish carries risk, especially if you're working with little tiny fish. But we wanted to make sure, since we saw that the Metroplex treatment had at least gotten rid of the ciliates inside the fish tissues, we wanted to see if it had taken care of the ciliates outside the fish. And so in order to do this, we couldn't use the mortalities because they inherently attracted the ciliates from the water. And so by sedating the larval fish with MS-222, which is a common aquarium sedative that we use for a variety of medical treatments. I was able to put the fish into a light sedation where they're still breathing very comfortably, but they do not stress when we're able to move them under the microscope. And so it limited their stress. We were able to look at them. You can see on that left photo, that was the only photo I got from this process, that there were no ciliates moving around on the outsides or under the gill cavity. And so that was really, really promising at this point. And we also did not lose any fish through the sedation process. As soon as we were able to check them out and see that there were no ciliates, we moved them to a recovery container and they woke up in about 2 minutes. So it was a big success to do this on such a small fish. Again, they were probably a centimeter, maybe 1.5 centimeters long at this time. And speaking of growth, they did grow quite a bit throughout this process. That top left photo is a newly hatched fish on the first day. You can see that the head and body of the fish was about 2 millimeters. So even though their total length was 5 millimeters, they really only had about 2 millimeters worth of structure. And then as each month they grew a couple millimeters at a time. This isn't the same fish being measured every single time. So when you see only 0.5 millimeter of size difference, that's not necessarily the same fish, but they all were picked kind of throughout opportunistically as we could pull them out and examine them. Most of this was done by placing a ruler on the bottom of either a beaker or a petri dish, something that could house the fish, and then we just watched and took videos until they sat on the ruler at the right angle, and then clipped pictures from that. So it was a bit of a process. There is some room for error in this, but it was able to do a comparative size difference as they got bigger. So the last thing that I find really particularly interesting about lumpsuckers is that they glow. There is a article that was put out by Friday Harbor in 2022 about dimorphic fluorescence of the Pacific spiny lumpsucker. And among other things, they talked about how the suction disc of a lumpsucker glows bright green under blue and ultraviolet light. And it was also said that the red lumpsuckers occasionally glow red, which is also what algae will glow under UV and blue light. As you can see in that crack that's of the tank, the corner of the tank, that's algae that is glowing red. I haven't observed the red glow on the fish yet. However, the lumpsucker suction disc is quite good to see glowing green. So it's super interesting. We've seen it in both the adults and the juveniles. On the left photo, that is one of our juveniles who is currently just under 2 centimeters long. And then on the right, that's one of our wild-caught adults. So super interesting to see and look forward to trying this throughout the different times of the year with different colored lumpsuckers and see what happens. Tons of references for this, so I'll put the slide up here if you want to check it out. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask them now. Or you are welcome to send an email if you have questions later. My email is on this slide as well.
Right. Well, thank you, Emily, for that amazing talk. I've got tons of questions just myself.
Wonderful.
If anybody has questions, if you've just joined us, please feel free to add any questions. I know Emily would love to talk and even go back in slides if we need to. So please drop your questions, comments into the chat box there. But I've got a few questions to start off with. Talking about the different types of lumpsuckers in just Puget Sound or like Puget Sound, but versus out on the Atlantic versus the other ones. And one of the things that I was like, our lumpsuckers are so much smaller. They are shorter lived and they have more armor on them. So like, is that because of the harsh environment that they're living in? Like literally, like they're like microscopic compared to the 2-foot fish. Like how, what is the advantage of the different, different morphology or adaptations, or like how did they split to be so diverse from being lumpsuckers?
So the family Cyclopteridae includes 30 species. I believe there are 6 or 7 different genuses or genera in that group. So it is still a pretty diverse group. Eumicrotremus has some smaller species. So it's got about half of the family's species. And I would say based on the ones that have easily found size data, not all of them have a lot of data on the different species. And I would say they're not, Pacific spiny lumpsuckers aren't the smallest, but they are on the smaller end of even just within that genus. Some of them get 5 to 7 inches long. And then the smallest ones actually live in Japan. They are Eumicrotremus awe, I believe is how you say it, AWAE, and they only reach about 0.8 inches long. So those ones are the smallest of the small lumpsuckers. The larger ones are in different genus or different genera. So the Atlantic lumpsuckers are Cyclopterus lumpus, and so Cyclopterus is quite a bit bigger grouping. So yeah, and then the smooth lumpsucker is all kind of its own fun thing.
Awesome. Well, we've got I don't want to take up all of the question time. So we got a few that rolled in. We've got some of our regulars from the Mass Center saying hello and that they loved it and all the
Wonderful.
information. But we have a question of what is the typical lifespan of a lumpsucker, and do they have a higher lifespan if they are kept in captivity?
So that's a great question. They for the Pacific spiny lumpsucker, there's not a lot of like hard data of this is how long they live that's been published. I'm sure aquariums that have kept them can say like, yes, they live this long. Personally, I've seen adult lumpsuckers that have been wild caught live about a year in aquariums. I would say 8 to 18 months is typically how long wild caught adult lumpsuckers live in an aquarium, which would make them be 2.5 years old total based on the timeline of development that we saw in our growth project here. So I would say that they don't necessarily live longer in captivity, but they have a lot more options if they get egg bound. There's treatments and things that vets can suggest that can potentially extend their lives. It really depends on the temperature that you keep them. If you keep them at a lower temperature, any kind of bacterial or ciliates, any kind of medical parasites issues are often slowed down in colder waters. And so if you've got that control, sometimes they can live a little bit longer, but they are a relatively short-lived species just in general.
Awesome. Another question rolled in. But before we move on to like a different topic, I had questions about like the lifespan, especially with them 1 to 2 years old, right? Like it's a quick lifespan. So are they laying eggs at like 1 year? Like it sounds like it's almost like they've got to like mature pretty quickly and have eggs pretty quickly in order to have their whole species survive.
Yes. So from my understanding, ours that we grew up to 8 to 10 months haven't given any indication that they're ready to lay eggs. So I would say probably in a year and a half is probably when they start laying eggs. However, I know that I've talked to a couple different researchers on lumpsuckers, and one of them did mention that when they start laying eggs, it's typically they'll lay eggs every 50, 60 days until they pass. So it's not necessarily they lay eggs once and then pass like an octopus, but once they're in that mode, that's kind of the end of their life. So if you can keep them going for a couple cycles, that's great. But that is an indication that they're towards the end of their lifespan.
Well, they're cute, so I want to keep them around. So
Yes, absolutely.
So one of the next questions that we got was, since they have an armored exterior, what animal might try to eat a lumpsucker?
That is a great question. So while they do have the armored enamel exterior, I don't know how well it helps them in all cases of predation. I know that seabirds are pretty high on the list of what eats a lumpsucker. There's a couple different species of like shore and seabirds that are known to go after them. And then just larger fish. I believe pollock are on that list, but like a big mouthed fish would be very capable of eating a lumpsucker. Whether they would have a good time digesting it might be another story, but they are, as long as it fits in their mouth, they're likely capable of eating them.
Awesome. Well, I mean, personally, I don't think I would either try to eat it either. There's not enough meat on the bones for that.
There's not a lot to them, no.
So it's speaking about the armoring on the outside. So going towards you were talking about how they're enamel covered tubercles. So protrusions on the outside of their body that are covered in enamel like our teeth. So the outside of them is covered in teeth.
Pretty much, yeah. I believe that was an article when the study on their external tubercles actually came out, was they're armed to the teeth, I believe was something along the lines of the article. But yes, so they have the enamel covering their tubercles, and so it's just a different external covering than scales. So they are scaleless fish, but they do have quite a bit of protection regardless.
So the next question to follow up is, do they have teeth on the like inside?
So they they have like teeth-ish. They don't necessarily have like sharp teeth. I've been quote unquote bit by a lumpsucker, and there's nothing to snag on. But they are, and they typically will swallow their prey whole. It's not like taking chunks out of things. They don't chew, but they do have kind of a rough plate around their mouth. So they do have the ability to kind of like rip kind of a thing, but they don't have like teeth that like you would think of teeth.
Okay, so they at least got something to like grab, hold on to. Okay.
It's more sandpaper-ish, honestly, than tooth-like.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
Still sound very scary.
Yes, in this photo here with it sitting on the brittle star, which our lumpsuckers have decided to do brittle star rodeos constantly, which I think is absolutely adorable. You can actually see kind of into the mouth of the lumpsucker, so you don't see any like teeth there. You can see into the gill rakers, which are part of the gill structure. But right on the inside of their lips is kind of where the roughness starts.
So teeth on the outside, smaller, you can call them teeth on the inside. They have a suction disc that they're born with that helps hold them onto the ground. Do their fins, like it sounds like their fins are not really used all that much. So thinking about like how far could they swim, or like what kind of current are we talking about? Is the suction cup that thing that's going to hold them when, as we lovingly call it, the Redondo River runs and it's a huge current? are they able to hold on during that time? Because it sounds like they're not going to be able to swim against that current. They'd get pushed right up to Seattle.
Yes, they are. Their suction is quite strong, even though it's not as strong as the northern clingfish. It is very capable of holding them in place. And it is so strong because their body is not shaped to be aerodynamic. It is very round, so its suction just has to be strong to be able to hold on in currents like that. If it's on a structure that is not moving, it could probably withstand the Redondo River, I would say. Um, and they aren't good swimmers, but they are capable swimmers. And so their pectoral fins that you can't really see in any of the photos because they're clear, are typically more how they move, and then their tail is used more as a rudder. So they are able to swim, but their pectoral fins go really fast, and then their tail kind of points them in the right direction. And then you could see in the video when it landed on my finger, it just kind of drifted with the current. It didn't try to swim against it, but it wasn't like just like going, it has some control, but not a ton. They will also, I will say, stick to each other occasionally, as seen in this photo. That was very quick. It's not a great photo because I had to get it before it detached, but their suction cup will stick to just about anything.
So on the same lines of our evolutionary advantages, like the suction cup, the teeth to keep things from trying to eat it because the teeth are on the outside of the body. We were talking about that they are laying tons of eggs because they're so small. You've got ciliates or the parasites that are trying to eat them when they're babies, and so having lots of them helps make sure that they maintain their population around here. Can you talk to like, we here in the Pacific Northwest have been raised in education of salmon. So like how similar and like the ratio of recruitment towards like salmon, right? Like salmon, we have to make sure that there's at least two that come back, and you're like, there needs at least to be one to keep the population going. Is this population of cute little balls of fury, like, are they, of concern? Like, is there a decent population, especially with like climate change issues and warming waters? Like, is there thoughts of like conservation on these cool, unique creatures?
So, unfortunately, there is not a lot of study into the Pacific spiny lumpsucker. The University of Washington at Friday Harbor is where I see most, if not all, of the more recent articles on their study, which has been the enamel covered tubercles and then the color fluorescent. Those are the two articles I've seen most recently. So there hasn't been a ton of studying into their distribution or their climate change resiliency or anything. And so I believe, unless it's been updated recently, that they are not evaluated as far as status goes. And so the biggest thing with the Pacific spiny lumpsuckers, is that they will likely, with shifting water temperatures, they will likely not disappear completely, but they will potentially disappear from the Puget Sound, because our surface temperatures in the summer reach mid 60s, which is obviously much too hot for the little lumpsuckers. So if I had to put out a hypothesis, an educated guess, that they would likely just shift their range up towards the Arctic. One of the really cool things about the FishBase website is it has a projection of their 2050 range, as compared to their current range, which pretty much just shifts them out of the Puget Sound. And so again, not extinct, but definitely shifting areas. So it may be more difficult to see them in the South Sound in coming years.
So it sounds like these fish are pretty adaptable to survive enough in their location. But I know, like, even with us and like the changing of the temperatures with our water seasonality wise, going down deeper and things like that. Is this going to be like a slow migration, or could we like even see like evolutionary changes for them to, they've changed so differently from our Atlantic species and the species up north. Would we start to see any like shifts or changes in that body morphology as a hint to climate change?
We could, but really don't know. Because this species, or because this family in general is a cold water species, it would likely be more of a population shift than something that we could visually observe. And so yeah,
So we
but
won't be getting the smooth lumpsuckers anytime soon.
not that I am aware of, no. If they are only found in Alaska, they likely do not tolerate our warmer, less salty waters of our local sound.
So you had said that some of the babies had died due to what it's called uh, failure to thrive. Can you describe that more to people who have never encountered that term before, or who haven't raised, animals or things in captivity?
Yeah, so with any kind of organism, sometimes you just have something that obviously something went wrong, but either you don't find out what it is, or there's no visual signs or any kind of signs that could tell you why. And so failure to thrive is just kind of it's more of a catch-all term than anything. But we did have some fish that either didn't start eating or didn't develop the proper internal organs, or something happened that didn't allow them to continue to grow. And so that was something we saw not with a lot of our fish, but with some of them, especially when you have a population of almost 400 baby fish, you're going to have some that unfortunately don't make it for this reason or that reason. So that's not necessarily a catch-all term that we want to use. So if we can figure out what happened, we want to, so that we can stop it from happening the next time. But unfortunately, there are certain situations when we just don't know what happened. So yeah, that's what we use.
If you are just joining us or you've been here all along, and if you still have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. We've got a few minutes here and I've got tons of questions, so I'm going to keep asking mine. But if you do have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. Again, back to like the 400 eggs, only two really have to survive to keep the population up. How common is it for male fish to guard their eggs? Because it sounds like that helps the chances of survival, right? Until they at least hatch. So how common is it for a male fish and any fish species to be the one that guards and cares for them?
I would say it's more common than you'd think. Off the top of my head, besides lumpsuckers, grunt sculpin are another local fish where the male is typically the one to guard eggs. In our local bay pipefish, the males are the ones to carry and actually birth the eggs. In the plainfin midshipman fish, which is another local species, when they come shallow, the males guard the nest in the intertidal zone. And so it's in this area, it's actually a fairly common technique. Any kind of parental care where the adults are taking care of either the eggs or the larval fish increases the chance that these fish will survive to adulthood and continue the population. So the combination of many, many eggs produced plus any kind of parental care while those eggs are being developed will help their survival chances.
Nice. So survival chances, you were talking about the eggs that weren't being guarded by the male because he was doing such a great job of cleaning the eggs, had ciliates, and you described them as kind of like a parasite. Are they natural in the environment? Like it sounds like they're pretty bad, especially if they're eating eggs and kind of even taking over some of the baby fish. So can you talk more about the ciliates themselves and like they bad?
So ciliates are a very big group of microorganisms that are found in the water. They they're not all bad. So we don't want to like label them as bad because they definitely have a place in the ecosystem. Even in this case, when we couldn't confirm that they were the cause of the stress or the mortality event, they were doing what ciliates do, which is break down decaying tissue and dying or dead animals. And so that's what ciliates do in the water. And so they have a place. They just, unfortunately, that place is not with our baby fish. And so it's also part of potential sea star wasting issues, is ciliates are not necessarily the cause of wasting, but they have been associated with wasting outbreaks. So in that case, they're finding a stressed sea star with dying tissues and dying cells, so they're attracted to that dying tissue and breaking it down, which further exacerbates the sea star wasting. So they're not necessarily the cause themselves always. Sometimes they can be, but they're not always the cause. They're just like part of the problem. So they're in the water column, they are in the water, they're on surfaces, and they are just attracted to the decaying tissue because that's what they feed on.
Okay. So they're cleaning up and helping nutrient recycle in the
Yes.
environment. Okay. Okay. So one last question, because we're now at 4:30. They glow.
Yes.
Okay.
They
Why?
do.
Yes. Do we know why they glow? Because I know there's other animals out there that also glow.
So, the article that I read said they don't know for sure. There's going to need to be more research into it, but because it's their suction disc and it's the underside of them, it could be some sort of communication or signaling that they use that for. But it's not something that they can turn on and off, to my knowledge. So we don't know is the answer, but there are a couple of hypotheses of why they might glow.
So if I go onto the beach, I'm not just gonna like see these little floating bumblebees in the water like glowing. It's strictly under UV light that this shows.
Yes, yeah, it is under UV and blue light, so very specific spectrums of light. You will see the glowing, and typically you would have to be underneath them to be able to see them. If you're seeing it and they're upside down, you might have an issue with your lumpsucker.
Well, I just want to say thank you for the amazing talk about our Pacific Spidey lumpsucker, such a very unique fish, and unique in its lumpsucker family too, right? Like
Yes,
just
very much.
super cool. So thank you everyone who also joined us for this talk and added questions to the chat box. If you still have any questions afterwards, you can email Emily. She has her email address right there on the slide there, or come down and talk to us at the Mass Center Aquarium. We're open to the public and we're free Saturdays from 10 to 2 during Discovery Days. And if you're coming down and asking questions, you can also see the cute lumpsuckers that Emily has highlighted throughout this entire talk. And cross our fingers, we have one of the males is taking over a barnacle right now. So, more babies TBD.
We have the possibility of more babies coming. I believe we have at least 4 males currently and about 12 fish, 10 fish. So we've got about an equal male-female ratio. So very possibility
So
of
400
babies.
eggs times 10. That's a
Yeah,
lot.
we're not going to think about that.
All right. Well, thank you again for such a great talk. If you're new to our Science on the Sound speaker series, we have talks on the first Saturdays of the month on our YouTube channel at 3 o'clock or 3:30. And if you missed last year's Science on the Sound series, all of those are recorded and on our YouTube channel. And if you want to stay up to date on all of the cool stuff that we are doing, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow us on our other social medias because we definitely post lumpy pictures quite often. But all right, everyone, thanks for joining us.